So I'm John Kane, and I welcome you to Let's Talk Native on this Saturday, July 27th. While this program may not provide a path to spiritual enlightenment, we do encourage and in some cases start conversations. We don't do prayers or buffalo speeches. We take a tough look at history, oppression, and survival. We talk about culture, the arts, politics, and identity. We may step on a few toes along the way, but our real goal here is to bring people together by breaking down what separates us. We take on the false narratives and apply critical thinking to all that is being heaped upon us. And we do it all right here from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. So let's talk Native. But before we get started, let me remind people that we stream audio of this program live at www.letstalknative.com. We stream video of the show live on Facebook Live. We take the audio and we put it up on SoundCloud. And that allows it to be reposted as a podcast on all of your favorite podcast platforms. We take video of the show and we put it up on our YouTube channel, which is Let's Talk Native TV. I encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe to our podcast, and don't be afraid to share what we've got going on here. Well, look, we're not a viral sensation by any means. And later on in the show, I want to talk about who this program is for. We've talked about it before, and I want to reiterate a few things, but I've got some other topics I want to address coming out of the gate. Again, I'm host of Let's Talk Native, and I'm assisted in studio by Jake Proud, who is managing our video and our sound. So let's get started. I mentioned protests a couple of shows back, right across the U.S., right, from claimed territories of Hawaii to claimed territories of Puerto Rico, and of course in New York City there were protests. Now those were the three main protests I talked about. In New York City, the protest was because Eric Garner, the murderer of Eric Garner, this officer Pantaleo, again was cleared at the federal level. No criminal charges brought against him, and for me, it harkened back to a couple of shows ago again that I talked about with the Declaration of Independence, when Jefferson was claiming that that King George was performing mock trials to clear people of murder. Well, I don't know how else you describe what's been going on with any of these police who've killed unarmed, especially people of color. It just they're mock trials. I mean, nobody's rarely ever prosecuted. And in Eric Garner's case, again, the guy was choked to death. He was allegedly choked over cigarettes, which he didn't even have any on. But yeah, you heard me right. He was choked over cigarettes, something that a ticket could have been written on. And instead, Officer Pantaleo and company killed him. And they killed him slow. This wasn't a pulling of a trigger, a quick, a split-second decision to pull a trigger erroneously. This was choking the life out of a man. And, of course, the William Barr Justice Department decided that they couldn't they didn't think they could prove intent. You choked the life out of somebody, and they didn't think they could prove intent. So what was happening, and this was happening in various places in New York City and other places, they were protesting, and they were going to do an 11-day protest condemning these findings. And more specifically, what they were trying to, at very least, they understood that the likelihood of getting these guys charged, Pantaleo and company charged, was unlikely. But they at least wanted them fired. They want them off the force. These are people who were responsible for killing somebody. And when I say killing an innocent man, Eric Garner was an innocent man. I'm not saying the guy never sold cigarettes, but that is not a death sentence. So that's what the protest that was happening in New York. And I have some. I'll go back to New York this coming week, and I'll get a chance to find out a little bit more about how those are all transpired, because you didn't see much on the news. But the other two protests, you saw a little bit, and I'm going to talk about some of the strange happenings with Mauna Kea. Now, the Mauna Kea is the tallest mountain in Hawaii, and there is a desire to put a 30-meter telescope on the top of this mountain that is considered sacred by the Kanaka Maoli, by the native Hawaiian people. And this battle has been going on for years. And what's strange is that almost all of a sudden, there's momentum. All of a sudden. So, I mean, for years, while people have been, and I've talked about it on this show for many years. I mean, for at least 3 years, I've talked about it here on this show. I've done shows on it in New York. And I've talked about a lot of Hawaii issues, including the illegal occupation of Hawaii, the illegal annexation of Hawaii, the whole bit. And this is just more of that. I mean, this is, breaks it down to one specific site that the non-Hawaiian population is hell bent on putting this huge telescope on top of their mountain. But again, even though this battle's been going on, and there have been people in the trenches on this thing for years, now that it's in the 11th hour, where essentially all the approvals have come from the state level and federal level. I mean, there've been the court challenges have all been satisfied as far as the TMT, the 30-meter telescope crowd is concerned. They've jumped through all the hoops and they're ready to build. And all of a sudden, Star Power signed up. Jason Momoa, Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. I mean, I watched some of the interviews on The View. My question is, where the hell was everybody for all these years? If this had this kind of coverage 2 or 3 years ago, this would be a moot point by now. So now all of a sudden, Tulsi Gabbard, she never weighed in on this thing. All of a sudden, now she's running for president, and now she's weighing in. Now, look, I'm not criticizing these people for taking the stand with the people fighting for Mauna Kea. I'm not criticizing them for doing it. My question is, where were you for all these years? I mean, there have been people struggling to raise this issue for years, and yet now all of a sudden, I don't know what throws the switch where all of a sudden the major networks can cover. I mean, you can go back to like Standing Rock, for instance. The struggle went on for years and years, and all of a sudden Amy Goodman comes out and takes some pictures of dogs biting people, and now all of a sudden all the networks covered it. And the problem is, if you only cover it in the 11th hour, it's a much bigger lift to stop something like this. So, I mean, look, I'm glad The Rock is involved. I'm glad Momoa is involved. I'm glad, that the major networks are not just covering it on the news, but on talk shows. I'm glad. Man, I just wish you guys were doing this a couple of years ago. So that's the follow-up. I mean, so while protests have been happening, across not just Hawaii, but a lot of native territories that were stepping up. Because again, it's kind of an indigenous land issue, issue, right? And so that's why I wanted to talk about it a couple of shows ago. But then, I mean, almost since then, now, I mean, look, there's viral tweets that have gone out. There's Instagram, there's all these YouTube videos. All this stuff is out there now. And again, in a way, I guess what everybody's been protesting for years has kind of come to fruition to grab the attention of other people. But man, taking a stand matters. Taking a stand definitely matters. And it does have an effect. And especially it has a major effect when you can, jump on an issue before it has so much momentum, you can't stop it. So, I mean, and if you don't believe me that these protests can have effect, let's shift gears to Puerto Rico. So what happens in Puerto Rico is, a U.S. territory, claimed by the United States anyway after the Spanish-American Wars, another tropical paradise like Hawaii that has been driven into, as far as Puerto Rican people are concerned, driven into financial ruins. I mean, it is not something that the Puerto Rican people have had a great deal of say over, because there's been money coming in from everybody from like Donald Trump to hotels and the tourism industry. The price for things in Puerto Rico are high. The employment levels are low, especially for the indigenous population from Puerto Rico. So it has been a almost a cautionary tale of what not to do. I mean, it is colonialism gone bad, gone in some of the worst possible ways. Now you factor in, the fact that it's in the line of hurricanes, and in the last hurricane that went through over 2 years, almost 2 years ago now, the Puerto Rico still hasn't recovered. And of course, that's all been on during the Trump presidency, an absolute failure to adequately provide the people of Puerto Rico the support they needed to recover. Pales by comparison to anything that any Republican strongholds have gotten in terms of financial assistance from the federal government. But to make matters worse, even the Puerto Rican folks who get into politics oftentimes get in there with a little bit of that stank on them. And so Ricky Rosello, or Rosello, depending on how you want to say it, Rosello, 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 has had a history of corruption, and he's the governor of Puerto Rico, as if it were a state, which it's not. But he's the governor, so he's the chief executive officer of the territory of Puerto Rico, and he has been mired in controversy, and it only got worse when almost 1,000 of his text messages were exposed by people who just had enough of this guy. And those text messages included just slamming, they slammed women, they slammed gay people. He made light of people who died in the wake of Hurricane Maria. He condemned. They were just deplorable messages, and I'm not even going to go through them, but I've seen some of them, and it just absolutely deplorable. And it's the kind of thing that, when you get busted on something like this, you just quit. You just resign. You turn in your resignation and you say, look, I can no longer serve in the capacity of this job because of the distraction caused. And look, you apologize, and you don't give one of those apologies where you say, if anything I put out there offended you, I'm sorry. No, you have to have some real contrition. You got to say, what I did was wrong, and it was insensitive, and I have no excuse for that kind of language or that kind of sentiment to be expressed as a human being, let alone as a public servant. I mean, he should have done and he didn't do any of that stuff. I mean, he gave some weak, half-hearted apology, and the people just came out by the hundreds of thousands of people in Puerto Rico, and they were demanding his resignation. He was saying, "No, I'm not going to resign. I don't plan to run in the next election, but I'm going to serve out my term here." And of course, within a couple of days, he finally gets to the point where he says, "I'm going to resign." And he does so in a speech where he sings, his own, toots his own horn about his great accomplishments as the governor. And even though he's resigning in disgrace, I mean, it's just, but I mean, the reason I wanted to talk about Puerto Rico in particular is this is a success. Now, look, Puerto Rico is not out of the woods. I mean, just because, the governor resigns. That doesn't solve Puerto Rico's problems. It solves a personality problem, but it doesn't solve the larger problems, the economic problems with Puerto Rico. It doesn't root out all of the corruption that's going on, but it's a start. And what it does is it's a real feather in the cap of the people who came out and protested because they accomplished something. Now the question is, do people stay engaged? Now, and I mentioned that the Star Power that got involved in Mauna Kea, Star Power got involved in Puerto Rico too. Some, Ricky Martin, who apparently this governor also slammed him in his text messages. He led the charge. So as far as some of the Star Power in Puerto Rico, a couple of other major recording artists and celebrities who are known throughout all of Latin America stepped up and stood with the people there. And I mean, they didn't just show up for photo ops. They stood with the people. So, I mean, it just shows you the power that people really have if they use it properly. Now, in this situation, the success was easy to predict at some point because there wasn't a whole lot of people standing up with Ricky Rosale, which is, I mean, for anybody who thinks, well, why don't 500,000 people or a million people show up in Washington and demand Trump's resignation? Well, here's the problem with that. Trump still has a solid base of support. Now, why he does is a good question, especially when you consider where his support comes from. It comes from the evangelical right that you would think would be openly and squarely condemning, a guy who's been married 3 times, cheated on all his wives, including with porn stars. Has a history of allegations against him, everything from sexual harassment to grown women to young women. His connection with Epstein. There's, I mean, the debacle associated with him cozying up to Russia prior to his election. There's all kinds of reasons that people should condemn this guy. But you know what? You can go right across redneck America, white supremacy America, and he has a solid base of support. So as much as I think people need to stand up on issues, the idea of trying to take an individual down who, and I'm not suggesting that Trump has an immense popularity, but he has enough popularity that you're not going to take him down with protests. But we need to address these issues, especially the local issues, at a bigger level. We need to step up. Look, you want to stop a telescope from going up on Mauna Kea? Then we need to support the people who are the stakeholders there. And if you want to support, what's happening in Puerto Rico, we don't all need to go to Puerto Rico. We don't all need to go to Mauna Kea or go to the Big Island of Hawaii. By all means, it'd be great to go. But keep in mind, tourism is one of the problems that plagues, these tropical paradises that have been turned into the playground of the rich. So there has to be a sensitivity associated with that. But there are ways to step up. I mean, one of the posts I put up there, I think it was 30 ways to support, the battle to protect Mauna Kea. Look, we have territories that are slated for oil exploration and natural gas, mineral leases and oil leases that this administration has been issuing on places that should be protected. But nobody steps up. And that's the point that I'm trying to make. Look, I talked about these protests a couple of weeks ago. Now, I don't know if the one in New York is going to have the success that Puerto Rico has, and they get these murdering cops fired or not. And I don't know if the uptick and the star power associated with this Mauna Kea battle against the 30-meter telescope is going to turn the tide here. We hope it does. But I'll tell you the other thing that I'll say about the Mauna Kea battle is there were many people who were fighting against the 30-meter telescope and fighting to protect their sacred mountain who didn't want to mix issues. They didn't want to say, well, yes, I'm fighting to protect Mauna Kea, but I'm not really that involved in the Kingdom of Hawaii fight, the fight to expose the illegal occupation of Hawaii and the unlawful annexation of Hawaii, the illegal statehood of Hawaii, all of that stuff. People wanted to keep it separate, and maybe because they didn't necessarily buy into that battle. But one of the things that I saw developing as the clock was ticking on this 30-meter telescope coming to Mauna Kea was all of a sudden you started to see a little bit more cooperation between those two issues, the overall land issues. And frankly, I don't know how you don't. I don't know how you separate trying to protect your mountain from a $1 billion enterprise being built on top of it that violates all kinds of building codes and of course all kinds of traditions and all kinds of other things. But I don't know how you separate the exploitation of the mountain from the overall exploitation, going right back to the coup that took out the kingdom and took out the Queen of Hawaii in the first place. These battles are connected, and I think what hurt the battle for Mauna Kea was that people didn't want to mix those conversations. And I'm not going to get into naming names, but I used to try to engage a few people to tell me more about the coup petitions, the petitions that tens of thousands of Hawaiians signed condemning this coup of a bunch of white men who took over Hawaii and claimed it to be no longer a kingdom but a republic and asked for annexation. But there were too many people who only wanted to focus so solely on Mauna Kea that they didn't want to have the rest of that conversation. So I think that's changed. Obviously, the star power. Look, listen to people on the View addressing this. Not even news, but talk shows talking about it. I think that's the way you bring the attention to this thing. And I think there are lessons to be learned here. The success in Puerto Rico, again, the uptick in notoriety associated with those who are fighting for Mauna Kea, as we're stopping pipelines and opposing, whether it's a pipeline in the going into in New York for natural gas, or whether it's any of these Northern Access pipeline. Look, even as we continue to monitor the Dakota Access Pipeline and so many of these others, we need to be vigilant, and we need to learn from the success of the protests that have worked. And one thing that I'll say about the Dakota Access Pipeline battle, while it didn't stop the Dakota Access Pipeline, again, a little too little, too late to stop it, and of course failure by the Democratic president Obama, and of course the Republican president in Trump. But we need to step up on the fights that we've taken on, and make sure that we do all that we can do, and we engage it at many different levels, and pull in the star power if you can. I mean, obviously, a bunch of people showed up, at Standing Rock to get their pictures taken. Jesse Jackson. There were actors and actresses. I mean, musicians. Dave Matthews. I mean, there were people who stepped up. But again, if you step up in the 11th hour, if you step up when most of the administrative remedies have been exhausted and the court challenges have been exhausted, all of that stuff, now you're really just a public sentiment against against a machine. And that's oftentimes very, very difficult. So, I mean, I wanted to mention, especially because seeing that the governor of Puerto Rico resigned, obviously is a huge success for the protesters. We're still waiting to find out what happens with the police officers in New York. But again, I'm impressed at the amount of media coverage, mainstream media coverage that Mauna Kea is getting. Especially since I know people have been in those trenches for years on this thing. They've been trying to fight this thing right from the beginning, and this planned development, putting a 30-meter telescope, and I get it. I understand why they want to put it on Mauna Kea. It's a beautiful view of the sky, but you know what? Let a country like Japan have it. They've got a similar situation with Mount Fuji and a few other, I think another mountain in Japan that would be appropriate. Let Peru or somebody down South America who has a high mountaintop that they can do this on. The people of Hawaii don't want it, and especially the traditional people of Hawaii don't want it. The Kanaka Maoli. Look, and like with any battle, there are plenty of people who have sold their soul. And there are plenty of people who have assimilated into the mainstream way of thinking on these things. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit on the second half of the show. But look, if you are indifferent about an issue, then learn what you can learn so you are no longer indifferent. So you take the stand. But if you're just if apathy is the problem, if you just don't care, then at very least, if you don't care about a subject, don't get in the way of the folks that do. That's that's the bottom line, and that's what I see. Oftentimes, you'll hear somebody within the ranks. Look, I've heard it from on the mascot issue. I've heard people say, "Well, I don't feel that way. I don't think it's a problem." Well, if you don't think it's a problem, then you know what? Then stay out of the conversation. If you're not bothered by it, then stay out of the conversation, because there are people that are bothered by it. There are people who oppose a 30-meter telescope on Mauna Kea. There are people who don't like a misogynistic, gay-bashing, governor, of their territory. But if you're okay with the fact that the president of the United States has no moral character, if you're okay with that, then don't stick up for his moral character. If it's clear that he has none, then just remain silent and let the people who are really disturbed by it have their voice. All right, we're at the bottom of the hour, so we'll take a break. We'll come back. When we come back, I want to talk about what Let's Talk Native is for, who it's for. And it's not a complaint. It's not. I'm not crying woe is me here. But I want to be clear for the folks who are listening to the show. Catch it live, catch it on podcast, check it on video afterwards. I want to I want to talk to you, because I think it's important that you understand why I do this essentially 3 times a week. All right, this is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. I'll be right back.
Aloha mai kako. If you would just take a moment to pause from your busy day and think about the most sacred place that you are connected to. Would it be the church or a temple? Say it. Utter its name out loud as I do. Mauna Awake.
There's a place where people go to connect with open toes. I can see it in my road, and I will go to the volcano and bare my soul.
Mauna Kea is a sacred
to Mauna Awake. Where's the love and respect for the sacred? Don't deface it, you can't replace it. When it comes to all that karma, my ohana, my kuleana, ayo.
My temple,
Mauna
my
Awake. One with the Mauna. And now I live in love with Honua. And in this life, I will stand strong like the Mauna. And I will live to carry the water.
keeper of fresh water, rains
And in this life, I will stand one with the Mauna. Out of the dark, and I will follow the spirits afar, and I will have no fear of the bombs. I will give myself to the cause of this sacred land.
for the love of the mountain.
Mauna Awake. Strong like the Mauna. In our faces, no subliminal. And what they doing to that mountain so criminal. Destroying acres of sacred mountains so they could look up at the stars that they counting. But my ohana, my kuleana, won't give up on this great mountain. One with the Mauna. And now I live in love with Honua. And in this life, I will stand strong like the Mauna. And now
All right, thanks for coming back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Hey, I want to thank my sponsors, Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses, ERW and Eric White. I want to thank those of you who, from time to time, drop a check in the mail or run into me and offer some support. Of course, I have and I have another sustaining sponsor, I guess, somebody who helps us out on a monthly basis who doesn't advertise it. So I'll just thank them anonymously, so to speak. But again, of course, we always use more support. We are little by little upgrading our studio here, changing our look a little bit. You'll see a little bit more as we go down the road here. And of course, that all takes resources. So anybody who's willing to help, we greatly appreciate it. Look, I also want to thank those of you who help by sharing the show. My wife in particular, who shares the Facebook live stream on a bunch of group pages, and the rest of you. I know there's a few individual. Kathy comes to mind. There's a few of you that share the YouTube videos. They share the podcast, and I appreciate all of it. And of course, I also appreciate the engagement. Not just on the shows and the comments that you offer during the show, but the posts that I put on Facebook, the comments that I offer up on Twitter, and I guess that brings me back to who do I do this show for? Now, I mentioned in the opening every week that I step on a few toes along the way, and I don't do it. I don't speak of the issues that I talk about to make enemies. But one of the things that is clear is that after 500 years since colonialism started, that the effect of white people has been drastic on frankly on the whole world. I mean, colonialism wasn't just, and imperialism wasn't just something that Native people experienced here. I mean, there are countries all over the world, whether it's Italy and in Africa or Great Britain in India and Pakistan and Asia. I mean, or Australia, any of these places. But certainly the United States had its hand in imperialism, not just as we experience it from a native standpoint, but even going into the Philippines and Guam and Puerto Rico, Hawaii. I mean, the effects the United States has had on South America has been devastating. Central America, absolutely devastating. So, but you find that there are people who become complicit in it. And you look, I am very supportive of Native issues and Native people, even Native people I don't agree with. And so when I talk about some of the issues that I talk about here, look, if I'm condemning, if I'm talking about the doctrine of Christian discovery, look, I know there's risk I'm going to offend people who are Christians. And look, even for my support of Hawaii is a very strongly Christianized culture, even the traditional people. I mean, and that's, to me, some of that stuff that's problematic. I think that, and the reason I bring these things up, the reason I bring up the effects that Christianity has had on colonizing our people, colonizing our minds, but as well as enlistment in the armed forces. Look, I know my father was in the Canadian military, so I know. I mean, how deep some of this, the military enlistment runs in native territories. But the reason I bring it up is because not everybody, and the reason I bring up all this stuff, not everybody is a devout Christian. Not everybody has made up their mind on military service. Not everybody has made up their mind on whether to protest or not protest this issue or that issue. Look, there are Native people. There are Native people who are invested in mineral extraction. A lot of Native leadership. I mean, I remember Brian Clattersby, president of the National Congress of American Indian, standing up, almost putting the for sale sign out there, saying, it was some large percentage, like 20% of the nation, meaning the United States, energy resources are on native territory, something along those lines. It's like, for one thing, why are they, if they're on our territories, why are the nation's resources? And that's the number that's the way he phrased that. And I mean, so look, there's a lot of native people who support mining. Navajo comes to mind. There's a lot of native people who support mineral extraction, oil exploration, or oil extraction, all of that stuff, fracking. And that's problematic for those of us who oppose it, because we have people within our own midst. Again, I mentioned the mascot issue. There are native people who are, they want to root for the Washington football team. They want to root for the Chicago hockey team. They don't want to root for the Cleveland baseball team and the Atlanta baseball team. They don't take the same stand that those of us who are in the activist community take. They don't take the same stand. And so they become used as tools against us. Look, assimilation is something that we all experience. I mean, look, I'm speaking in English here. I mean, so I'm not going to pretend that I've not been affected. I mean, but the reason I bring up the reason I talk to you twice a week from here and once a week in New York, and look, they're different audiences. I get it, but the reason I do this show is it's the same thing I talk about with the drug problem, right? I said, look, there are dealers, there are users, the addicted. But then there's those people who are right on the precipice, right there on the edge. They haven't taken the leap yet. So for me, doing this show is my opportunity to reach out to those people who are still weighing this stuff, still trying to figure out, apply critical thinking to their identity, to their survival. Look, I'm not trying to breed hate, and I'm not trying to cause division in our territories. Much of that division exists already. Am I trying to change some people's minds and get people to abandon, again, their patriotism for the United States, abandon their religious beliefs? No, I'm not really trying to do that. I mean, if my conversation does that, if the conversation that some of you guys take from this show, if that does that, that's not a terrible thing as far as I'm concerned. Look, I mean, you look at how much religion has become, or how much apathy has gotten into, especially Christians and Jewish people, especially. I mean, there are many people whose families for generations were devout Christians, and there are many in the entertainment industry and so many other sectors of professional professions. Jewish people have they're not practicing Jews. They're Jewish by ethnicity, but not practicing the faith. So apathy has really entered into the picture. But where religion is the strongest are amongst the most oppressed people. Some of the people who are oppressed because of those very religions that they're now. I mean, I look at how much black people have been oppressed, and yet there they are. They're devoted to their Christian belief systems, even though Christianity was used to enslave them. So I put this stuff out there so those of you who listen to the show can apply your own critical thinking. Now, I don't want anybody to take what I'm saying as the absolute unchallenged truth. You need to do your own research. But for those of you who are indifferent, the reason I talk about Native culture the way I do, I'm saying you don't need to be religious to be Haudenosaunee. You don't have to worship trees, or the gods of I mean, some of the stuff that people take literally in our culture miss the point. And so that's what I'm trying to put out there. I'm trying to tell people, look, there's something very pragmatic and very honest and very common sense about many of the native views, our ceremonies, our songs, our language. There's a reason we use the words that we use. There's a reason we have the stories. I mean, I talk about, Ed brought it up just last week, and he's brought it up a couple of times since he had come back to do the show. Stirring the ashes. Why do we have that? And if you take the mysticism out of it, if you take the religious connotations that are always associated with being native, and it's not just by our people. Look, there are a whole lot of non-native people who just love them some Indians, and they want to find out, they want to absorb our spirituality, so they want to appropriate it. They want to mix it with maybe a little Buddhism and Hinduism and a little of the Catholic or the Christian faith, and they want to create something that allows them to say, oh, I'm big tent. I support diversity. No, you support appropriation of belief systems that you never quite understood to make them fit you. Because if you honestly want to understand our culture, you can't put it in a little mystic box and say, oh yes, I just love your spirituality. I'm trying to make sense of some of this stuff and help people understand why we do the things we do, what our identity is really based on, because it's not based on praying to the Creator. Now, there are a lot of religions that do that. And again, the three religions of Abraham in particular, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, is all about God worship. That was never our culture. Now, if that's what you've adopted, that's what you've adopted. But there's a whole lot of people who want to claim to reject Christianity, but embrace so many of those principles. And what they do is they change and they alter the meaning of what it is to be native. And of course, there are some who want to claim that being native is being Christian. And there are some out there who want to suggest that the Ganawida, the peacemaker, was really Jesus Christ. I mean, that's how twisted some people have gotten over reshaping and reimagining and our culture. And I'm saying you don't have to believe that stuff to be onwe. You don't have to believe all of this. Being native isn't a faith-based identity. It's a natural identity. It's an identity that is based on our relationship with creation, not on our relationship with the Creator. Now, if that's the way you have to embody creation, is through the personification, I'm not condemning you for that. But just don't lose sight of the basics, the relationship issues. I mean, when we, again, on the military service, just know a little bit more of the American history and what the military has actually done, and how it's been used to oppress people all over the world, not just our people. I mean, the fact that the military massacred our own people should have been reason enough for our people not to say, no, I'm not going to ever serve in that military. But it wasn't. And whether our people enlisted for acceptance because or they thought that this was the key to survival. But if you look at the even more modern history, I stand with Muhammad Ali when he refused to go to Vietnam. He said, no, I'm not going to go kill some Viet Cong. They're not my opposers. They're not my oppressors. The people who are trying to send me there are. So I just want our people to think a little bit more about this. I mean, look, there are young people and there are older people who have children or grandchildren who are crossing those, taking those steps in life that could impact not only their lives, but their identities. And those aren't necessarily the same thing. Because there are a whole lot of people who run around calling themselves native. You know, some people aren't, but there's a whole lot of people running around calling themselves, Native American. And look, we got, one of the guys running for president. I mixed it up with somebody, Navajo, who was condemning, calling this immigration problem, literally calling them invaders. I mean, calling brown people, native people who are migrating, who are moving themselves, leaving some of what, behind territory that they love, but really experiencing a migratory pattern that's probably millennia old. I mean, our people have been on this continent for 130,000 years. Not just 30,000 years, 130,000 years. So when I start hearing our own native people, whether it's the northern border or the southern border of the United States, looking at people of color, brown people, native people, and calling them the invaders while they got their arms around border agents, while they're enlisting in the armed forces, while they're claiming to be good Christians, and yet they're going to call these poor people invaders. I mean, they aren't coming with guns to take something from you. Oh yeah, they squatted our land. We had to run them off. Wow. See, but I'm not going to become consumed with that dialogue with one individual, or with somebody running to be president, or running for Congress or for Senate or whatever. I'm not worried about those people, because whether they're successful or not. I mean, look, the reason I weighed in when Paulette Jordan was running for the governor of Idaho, look, I honestly hoped that she was going to win, and in doing so, realized, and it wasn't whether she won or not, that we lost probably a solid native person. We lost them to that system, but we had already lost her. And in the week leading up to the election day, I mean, again, she was probably advised to do so, but she cut her hair off, and she dyed it almost blonde. So this is a native person, because of the path that she chose, was willing to not just change her identity, but change her looks in pursuit of this other goal. And look, I'm not even condemning her for that, but I wanted to point it out. And look, I had people, some really traditional people around here, and people who claim to be traditional. I had people jumping all over me, again, stepping on toes. How dare you condemn a woman's looks? Look, I didn't condemn them. I just said, look, she looks whiter to me today than she did last week. Why is that? Is it because she's running for governor in the 7th whitest state in the United States? And so those pictures of her on horseback with natural scenery is not necessarily what's going to do the trick for her, in the final leg of this election? Well, yeah, probably. Somebody probably advised her, look, we gotta reach out to white people here. You got the native vote thing. I mean, to the extent that native people vote, and native people don't vote much. They don't vote much in their own elections, and they sure as hell aren't going to vote much in the American elections. And not that vote matters anyway, which is another issue that I talk about that probably steps on some toes. But again, the reason I do this show is not just, this isn't just about singing to the choir. If you're already like-minded then maybe you need a little bit of validation. I do the show also to give talking points. So when we are out there, whether it's standing in line at a movie theater or at a restaurant or at a bus stop, in a train, on an airplane, wherever we happen to be, and we have the opportunity to share a little bit of who we are to somebody who may not even notice we were there, or maybe they did. Maybe they saw us and they said, "Are you Native?" And they start to ask you that question. I used to travel with Gogoy Lagerdu all the time, Art Montour and people used to, they thought he was the most native looking guy on the planet. They thought he was a movie star, and people wanted to pose for pictures. People wanted to engage him in conversation. But the thing about Art, the thing about Gogoy Lagerdu is that he could have a conversation, and it wouldn't just be a superficial, yes, I'll pose for a picture, and that was it. We need to be articulate, knowledgeable, and like Ed Schindler always says, we've got to master the art of communication. It used to be our thing. Native people were noted statesmen. The reason the Onondaga are called senators, or I'm sorry, are called Senecas. I don't know. That was a Freudian slip. Well, because Seneca, the younger, he was an orator. He was a Greek philosopher, or Roman. I don't know, Roman or Greek. I don't know, one of those guys. and the statesmanship of the Senecas and a few prominent Senecas had already begun to impress people. I mean, look, and I know the etymology of the word Seneca. There's a few people say, well, it comes from a word that sounds, that sounds like the word Seneca. But the reason it got embraced by the outside was because they made that connection between this very stately people, these people who were great communicators, orators, diplomats, politicians, if you will. And they said, yeah, that makes sense to call them Senecas. I mean, that's what we were known for. I mean, it's not just Hayawenta and the Gonahuida. It's not just Corn Planter or Joseph Brandt, some of the names that people know. No, people whose names didn't matter because they were speaking for a larger group of people. They were speaking for, they carried all our voices. And because their voice was articulate, people got to know who we were as a people through those voices. Now, we don't have people doing that right now. I mean, look, part of the problem the Senecas have now is they don't have statesmen. They have lawyers. I mean, I look at this battle that the Senecas are still engaged in with New York State over revenue sharing. And since this battle's been going on, a fight in New Mexico took place. There's a fight happening in Oklahoma taking place. And we don't have our statesmen. We don't have our own diplomats working side by side with other Native people on this fight. And you know why the governor of Oklahoma is trying to squeeze the Native people in Oklahoma for a higher percentage on revenue sharing? You guessed it. Because of what the Senecas are paying and have been paying. Look, one of the worst revenue sharing agreements across the United States was the one the Senecas had. And the fact that they can't seem to end it because of, because of IGRA or because of arbitration or because of politicians, it's because we don't have statesmen. We don't have the people who are out there making the noise. We don't have the people out there educating people. And part of it is we're not even very articulate in describing what the problem is and why we hold this view. Instead, the governor gets to say what he wants to say. Dicer gets to say what he wants to say. Now the governor of Oklahoma gets to say what he wants to say. And we've taken a back seat. So what I do this show for is to try to empower. Maybe it's young people who have not even gotten up, have gotten to this place yet. But I want to empower our people to begin to take control of that communication and our identity. So while the vast majority of people may not necessarily hold the same view that I express on this show, there's some of you that do, and there's some of you that are indifferent. And if you hear it from me and you hear it from others, that have a similar voice, then you'll take it places that we fail to. That's why we do Let's Talk Native. Thanks for listening. We'll be back here on Tuesday. Yahweh.
Simple song, simple man. A simple thrift store clothes and a simple thing. He's gonna make it someday. He's gonna make it someday. That was a lifetime ago. A lifetime ago. Lifetime ago. A lifetime ago. A lifetime ago. Lifetime ago. Ain't no thief gonna take my gold. Ain't no priest gonna save my soul. Ain't no thief gonna take my gold. Ain't no priest gonna save my soul. My soul. My poor soul. My soul.